Mama, Daddy, Sissy, I love you. These words have changed my life in major ways at very different times. It's not the words themselves in this particular instance as much as it was the anticipation of the words. You see, at 13 months old, my husband and I sat in a small office with an audiologist who said to us, "Your daughter is bilaterally, profoundly hearing impaired." I wasn't quite sure what that meant, but in the moment, all I knew was daughter and hearing impaired was sending a message to me. And it sounded like I might never have the opportunity to hear her call me mama or say, "I love you." So I asked for confirmation, "Do you mean she's deaf?" Yes, that was the response. And in processing, all I could think about was what our family might be missing out on and what we were going to do. So my mind got to work. I started thinking about this little cute brown girl in front of me and what this might mean for her life. And in that same instance, I decided we're going to do something on her behalf. Whatever it takes, we're going to learn sign language. We're going to create space for this little girl around her experience. Well, as quickly as I started processing what the options might be for her, the audiologist jumped back in and let us know that we had some options. That was not on my radar. When I heard deaf, I felt like that was a final statement. In fact, that was just the starting point. The audiologist shared with us that we had our current state of no hearing to a future state of assisted hearing. Again, I was trying to process. I had just heard that my baby girl was deaf. I wasn't quite sure that I was ready to process future state assisted hearing. So I asked for more. The more was cochlear implant surgery. This was the path, or would be the path, to her development of verbal communication. We wanted to know more, and as we discovered more, we decided that for her big sister Ryan, her grandparents, her friends, family, her entire village, this sounded like the option we wanted to pursue. And so we did. Just a little background about hearing impairment. The World Health Organization reports that over 5% of the world's population suffers some type of permanent hearing loss. That includes 34 million children. And the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders also reports that 90% of hearing impaired children are born to hearing parents. These statistics welcomed me and my family into a set of new demographics. Reese was 13 months old when we got this diagnosis, and the next 5 years were replete with surgeries and unending speech therapy. Did I mention that I have an unrequited love for ENT doctors, audiologists, and auditory verbal speech therapists? It's a lot. I do. And over the course of her first 5 years of life, we put in the work. We put in the work and the practice to help her find, develop, and execute on that verbal communication that I thought was so elusive and not a thing, quite frankly, in that moment that we received her diagnosis. She did well. She responded well to the therapy, and we took on the role of engaging and reminding her at every step of the way that this was a situation that she could describe. And so I became her personal narrator at home, in the car, at the grocery store. And the greatest feeling were the days that eventually came to pass when Reese became her own narrator. Interestingly, and about the same time that I was working with Reese on her path to verbal communication, I received a call about another word, phrase that would change my life. This time, the phrase or the word, well, the phrase was, "The job is yours." The job was an Ombuds. Again, my reaction was took a few minutes to process. You might be picking up on a pattern with me. And in the moment I was trying to figure out exactly what I was getting myself into, I discovered that this particular role was powerfully anchored in helping to create space for words in a way that would help move individuals from a current state to a future state. The current state was typically anchored in conflict. Now you might be wondering, who knowingly takes on a job that is anchored in conflict? Well, I did. And I have to say, while that certainly crossed my mind, in the moment I also realized that this role presented as a tremendous opportunity. It was going to be a space or create a space for individuals where getting to and beyond this position of conflict was going to have significant impact on who they were and how they showed up and their workspace. It seemed very solution-oriented to me. And who doesn't want to be part of a solution? So I accepted the role, I started the work, and what I started to discover was that I really was on a parallel path to recognize the power of words. At home, it was a toddler trying to find her words. At work, it was an employee or a visitor in this case. That's the nomenclature that we use in the Ombuds world when we talk about those who come to see us. So visitors would come and share with me. Now, admittedly, if someone was going to reach out and find me and come see me, they were typically at their wits' end. I did not find that frustrating. I found that put me in a position where I was grateful. I was grateful to be on the receiving end of whatever the situation was, and again, partnering in practice to move this person forward. And so often what happened is we would start in conversation. I would get the details about what had happened and how that made the person feel. And I will say that typically ranged from helpless to angry. And in processing and unpacking all of that, we would talk about their options. Now, interestingly, they often reacted in the same way that I did when I found out that I had options about my daughter's hearing impairment. They would often respond with, "So there are some things I can do about this situation?" Absolutely. And that's when our work began. Trying to figure out what were the words that brought you to this space and what words would we be able to use to move you beyond this space. We would often role play so that they would be very comfortable taking on the conversations back in their respective workspaces. I can recall one early visitor who expressed some concerns about being classified as essential. Now, essential sounds like a very special category, and yet the way in which it was shared with this person did not leave that impression. And that's where we started. Let's unpack that, and let's figure out what we can do, what you can do to change that perception. I was finding parallel power in my roles as speech mom and Ombuds. It was really quite amazing. There were times when I would sit with visitors and we would talk about words, both received and expressed, and how those exchanges made a difference, again, in their work environment. It was almost like deja vu because those situations took me back to times when I sat with Reese and her speech therapist, and we were exploring receptive and expressive speech skills. There were so many common paths, and yet the common thread was the power of developing the right words for the right time. And so there were some key strategies that I pulled from both experiences that I have held on to and I have tried to share when the opportunity presents itself. First, the idea of early intervention. That is a key step to finding and positioning just the right words. In Reese's case, early intervention meant an early diagnosis, an early treatment plan, and it launched us on a path that led to a great path of progress for her. Her perception of her world around her had everything to do with how quickly and how early she was introduced to practicing developing speech. In my Ombuds space, early intervention meant, quite frankly, having a structure in place that allowed individuals to come forward and figure out what to do next. It was also an opportunity that could help move a situation of conflict to be addressed at its lowest level rather than watch it escalate to a potentially litigious outcome. Early intervention also made me aware of how important a range of options is in the moment. You heard me talk about what a difference knowing about my options made for me and Reese. And quite frankly, in my Ombuds space, I found that presenting visitors with a range of options was one of the most empowering actions I could take. Again, what it did is opened their perception about this situation, which here to now had been pretty narrow. That gave hope. That created hope. And that's where we started to move into some of that solution-oriented space. So early intervention was really important. Active listening, equally important. I was paying attention on Reese's behalf to what she was saying and what she wasn't saying. And with my visitors in the Ombuds space, I was doing the same. And also trying to help them pay attention to what was said and maybe what wasn't said, all as we try to move forward. Another strategy that was particularly helpful was that of facilitation. And so there comes a time where you find yourself in conversation, in practice, back and forth, using your listening skills, and yet you want to facilitate the development of what's to come. With Reese, that development was all about her language, her verbal language. With my visitors, it was all about their possibilities. How do I work through this situation and get beyond it? And so creating space by mentioning this range of possibilities was often a reality check in both cases for me. Another strategy that was really empowering was that of coach. What I discovered in my coaching mindset was that all of the work that we did on the front end, and a lot of work on the front end, would eventually and ultimately become the responsibility of the other person to execute. So with Reese, what that meant is she became her own narrator. She found her words. She could tell her own story. With my visitors, what that meant is we might role play a scenario so that they would be quite prepared for the conversation when it had to happen back in their workspace. So early intervention, active listening, facilitating, and coaching were some of the key strategies that helped me recognize and support the development of words, the choice of the right words, and the execution of the appropriate words to move forward. The interesting part is I discovered this on two very distinctly different paths, as speech mom and Ombuds, through cochlear implants and Ombuds. Oh my. I did feel like at times I was on the yellow brick road heading somewhere and pulling folks along with me. Sometimes it was that small toddler, other times it was my colleagues. And in the end, we did get somewhere. And that is what makes the important piece of words mattering so important to me. I am grateful for the opportunities that I've had to demonstrate how important it is to pay attention to those who can't always find the words they need in the moment that they need them. And what I hope that I have not only picked up for myself, but that I am sharing with others as I continue to practice those strategies and others, is that it's really important to make space for words. No matter what the experience, no matter what the situation, words matter. Thank you.